On today's On the Other Hand, we talk with someone working in the faith community. Here's a sneak preview.
That's why, if one party is very much anti-abortion, but also very much interested in promoting gun ownership or something like that, that's a contradiction.
This is On the Other Hand. Podcast sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas that explores politics and other issues of importance to Arkansans through conversations with community leaders. Stay with us as we talk to another leader in Arkansas who works across differences to get things done and to bring us closer together. Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, Glen White, and I'm here with my co-host, April Chatham Carpenter. On our podcast, April and I interviewed community leaders in Arkansas who in some way help work towards solutions across various divides, such as political or others, just in some way trying to heal divisions within our community. So, April, tell us who we've got today.
Glenn, I'm really excited. Actually, I just found out that our guest is also someone that went to school where I did at Oklahoma University. So we were teasing a little bit about Boomer Sooner, but that's not what we're talking about today. This is Anthony Taylor. He's actually a bishop of Little Rock for the Catholic Church and actually of all of Arkansas, and has been doing that for the last 16 years. Originally from Fort Worth, Texas. He spent many years growing up and being active in the Catholic faith in Oklahoma in particular, prior to coming to Little Rock. And I know that, Bishop, you also attended seminary in Rome and you obtained your doctorate from Fordham University. You've been very active in serving the Hispanic community, so I'm sure we'll get into talking about some of that. And I think your life motto is "The humble shall inherit the earth." So welcome to On the Other Hand, Anthony.
Thank you. Thank you.
So start out, we typically just have people tell us a little bit about themselves, and other than what I already introduced about you, what led you to become a bishop? Let's talk about that.
Well, actually, it's more like what led me to become a priest, because you become a bishop, you can't really apply for that job. And so my vocation story is kind of a long one, but at one point I was at OU thinking about maybe being a social worker. And then it really struck me that, a lot of people that I might help as a social worker are poorer spiritually than they are materially. And if they had their spiritual house in order, they'd deal with adversity a lot more effectively, a lot better. And then I reflected on the way I was raised and how I'm one oldest of 7 kids born in less than 10 years. My mom was sick for part of that period. That's why we skipped 1 year. But and so I reflected on how my own family was able to deal with adversity because they had a faith base to draw on. And so I discerned in that the Lord might be calling me to be a priest. And so I thought, well, I'll go to seminary. I applied to the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and I was sent to seminary, and I figured that if this is a good fit, I'll know eventually, and it was a good fit. It was what the Lord was calling me to. So to become a priest, and I served as a priest in Oklahoma for 28 years. And then I got this surprising phone call from the Pope's ambassador to the United States saying that the Pope had chosen me to be the Bishop of Little Rock. And they did all their research behind my back. I didn't know anything about that I was under consideration, and I was just driving. I called on my cell phone, and I said, well, of course, I've always done whatever the church has asked of me. So if that's what the Lord is asking, then I will do it. And so that's how I became a bishop anyway.
Interesting. So what kind of differences are there between the service of being a priest and a bishop for those people who might not be as familiar with that hierarchy?
A priest would typically be the pastor of a congregation or a chaplain at a hospital or some such thing like that, where the bishop is the overseer of the work of the diocese, the work of the church in the diocese. And the Catholic Church is divided into dioceses. Ours happens to be the same, coincide with the state of Arkansas. And so I oversee the operations of the church, deal with all the complaints that arise, all that kind of stuff from our 130 churches in Arkansas.
Well, my husband used to be a pastor, and just within the church itself, there were so many conflicts and things that came up. I cannot imagine what it would be like to be overseeing and dealing with conflicts and complaints that happen across churches, and things that you have to do. I'm curious, in your work as bishop, how do you go about addressing problems that might arise among differences between people?
Well, I start with prayer. I have a daily holy hour, and when I realize that I'm going to be dealing with something on a given day, that will be something that would be I bring before the Lord in the morning, before I do anything else in the day, and then, depending on what the problem is, see what would be the best way to approach the issue. Sometimes it's somebody that's upset with something I said in a homily, especially when advocating for immigrants or for some other issue that's also a political issue, but for us it's a moral issue. And some people might take exception to what I've said or done, or what a local priest has done, and try to be fair to both parties, listen well. Almost everyone that comes with a complaint is almost always doing it with good intention. Typically there's not ill will or malice. It's more seeing things differently from one for another, or feeling insecure about something.
So many good things that you talked about, just assuming goodwill at the beginning, of the parties that are involved, but also listening, being really important. Well, I'm sure we'll probably get into some of the more specific details related to some of those conflicts. I know I've got some questions about how you deal with the immigration issue in particular, but I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to ask the next question.
Yeah, one of the things we also ask people is find out what influenced them. You've spoken to this a little bit, but in your early life and your life experiences, what are the values that you've come up with, and what has caused you to adopt those values? And I kind of was thinking about three different areas, so maybe we can just take them one at a time. The values that led you to your views in faith, in politics, and in relationships.
Okay, well, so with faith, it was a matter of being, that's the environment I was raised in. And we prayed as a family. We went to Mass. We never missed Mass, even on vacation. We'd always look up where's the nearest Catholic church to where we'd be staying. And so, that's I just was immersed in and grew in that. Was an altar server early on, and in fact, I was an altar server when Mass was still in Latin. So that's before the Second Vatican Council was completed, and then the transition to the way we celebrate Mass now. So when I was a student at OU, I went to Mass every day, or most days when I didn't have a class conflict. Went to the Catholic chapel there, and they had Mass every day. And I went to the schools. I was in Catholic school, except for 5th and 6th grade, because my mother was sick during those years, and in 12th grade because our school closed when I was 11th grader. And so, so I was raised went to the Catholic school in Ponca City, Oklahoma, and it was just very natural. We would go visit our grandparents, and we would kneel by their bed and pray in the evening before them. And one of my brothers, Catholics have the habit of making a genuflection, going down on one knee when passing in front of the Blessed Sacrament. One of my brothers would do that when we walked past my grandparents' bedroom, because that was the place where we prayed. So that was kind of the environment that I was raised in, and made my own, embraced it.
Okay. One of the things that we often ask people is about politics, their views, and how they got there. I'm not necessarily asking you to disclose your particular political views, but in general, can you tell me what led you to, or what informs your political views?
One of the key elements in my vocation story, I made it sound like I was a social worker at OU, but in that program, but I wasn't really, just thinking about it. But years earlier, with the death of Martin Luther King Jr., that really was a big influence on me, because in him, before that, it was more a matter of imagining that what I was supposed to do is not commit any sins and be a good person and get myself into heaven. With him, I learned that Jesus calls us to do what we can to build the kingdom of God. And if we don't align ourselves with the work of the kingdom of God in this life, how do we expect to share in the kingdom in the life to come? And so he became a model for me, not so much regarding civil rights, although that was what was my entree into this. But I was in the anti-war movement, but at the time of the Vietnam War, and that was also before I entered the seminary. But starting, he died when I was in 8th grade, and so during high school I was already thinking about what God wanted me to do with my life. His death got me thinking about that.
What about just how you deal with relationships? What are the factors that have influenced how you deal in relationships?
I think the thing that most has influenced me is growing up in a large family. And so, there's 7 of us brothers and sisters, and we got, of course, my parents were there. And you learn so much on human interaction by being part of a family. And we would have our little squabbles, but that's all they were. And but we pulled together. We had a saying that no one can pick on my sister but me.
This next question has to do with the kind of dilemmas we find ourselves in a lot, being pulled in 2 different directions. There's always been somewhat of a difficult relationship between religion and government, and some people would argue it's particularly true today. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on how religion in general and the Catholic Church in particular can best work with our government and our politicians so that we're all working toward the common good and yet maintain this balance between being consistent with our religious beliefs as well as being consistent with the rights that everyone is granted under our Constitution.
Well, one of the things that I try to impress upon people is that there's a higher law. And so it's government and the higher law are not on the same plane. And so today we celebrate the Feast of St. Agatha, who was killed by the government. We look at what's going on in Nicaragua, and it's the church and the government, or Venezuela, same thing. And in our own country right now, that's true as well. And we have to always recognize that the higher law will a lot of times be inconvenient for people that have got a different agenda. And so to be able to address that in a way that is not judgmental, but nevertheless firm about what basic human rights would be a higher law. And when we see those violated by the government or by science or by any entity, we've got an obligation to speak up according to how we see things.
There's something that I ran into a while back. It was something Pope Francis issued a call, I believe it was in 2013, it struck me because it sounded so similar to what Braver Angels tries to do and what we think we need to do in this country is get people together and be a little more civil with each other. His call, as I understand it, was for a better kind of politics or a more charitable, calm, and tolerant way of dealing with people who have different views or different religions. At one point, I think the quotes I got was become neighbors to all and being at the service of the common good. So there's probably a lot to unpack there, but I wonder if you could help us see how that call is being carried out in the Catholic Church these days.
Well, the focus on the common good is straight Catholic teaching. And that's kind of the opposite of the rugged individualism that is in our culture. And so we rub up against that all the time because our people live in this culture. And so it becomes instinctual in that. We can't align ourselves with any political party. One of the things that I bring up, we do faithful citizenship thing every election cycle, is that there are also third parties. For example, the American Solidarity Party coincides with Catholic Church teaching right down the line. And so it's if you can in conscience vote for the red ones or the blue ones, well, look and see what third parties there are and whether one of them would be a better fit with your values and your vision of the country. Right now, I have the feeling that both political parties are trying to divide the Catholic vote, and because neither one fits very well with our beliefs.
Yeah, I think seeing ourselves as separate from the political fray and not trying to necessarily align straightly with one party is an interesting thing that I've seen Christians and other religions actually try to to manage and not managing extremely well at times. I think about some of the things you were saying in terms of there being a higher law. And I think at some level, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount really was calling us to that higher law. He would say, "You've heard it said, but I say. You've heard it said, but I say." Well, in the Beatitudes portion of that, one of the things that Jesus said was, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And there seems to be tension at times when in order to somehow get our way politically or religiously, we end up hurting people. So we end up not being necessarily peacemakers because we're just trying to push our agenda through. And so I'm curious, how can we stay true to our religious beliefs that might lead us to kind of go towards certain political advocacy or activism without carrying violence or hatred towards others who are different than us?
Yeah, that's very important. And it really to my mind, it comes from presuming the best of the other person. They don't have bad intent. They just see the situation from a very different perspective than how I see things. And if I want them to validate, I guess you could say, my beliefs or my perspective, I've got to be equally respectful of them and recognize that they're not bad people. They just, from my perspective, they're missing part of the story. And they probably think the same of me, but there's no excuse for violence or ugliness. A lot of times we'll have 40 days for life outside of an abortion clinic, and we'll be praying for the people there. But we work very hard to keep persons that are going to act in an ugly way away from that, because that's counter what we're trying to witness, which is the value of life.
Let's talk about that issue in particular, because I know that Catholics typically hold a pretty strong right to life or pro-life perspective. I'm curious as to what that means for you. What does it mean to be pro-life? What all does that include?
Well, we talk in terms of a seamless garment, where all of the life issues are interrelated to each other. So life needs to be protected and respected from the first moment of conception all the way to natural death, every stage in between. And everything that is harmful to human worth and dignity, everything that is incarceration when that's not necessary to protect society, for instance, that capital punishment when it's never necessary to protect society in our culture, all of those things are against the comprehensive view of the value of life. And so that's why, if one party is very much anti-abortion but also very much interested in promoting gun ownership or something like that, that's a contradiction. It's a comprehensive view of all of life is integral to each other.
So from conception to death being that pro-life perspective, that's just another example. You talked earlier about how sometimes our political, it almost feels like that you're without a party, that there are, some things on one side you might be in agreement with, and then some things on another side that you might be in agreement with. And it's like there's no political party that represents everything that the Catholic Church believes or espouses.
Except the American Solidarity Party.
I had never heard of that party before. So,
and Arkansas is one of the few states that it was on the ballot of, and so it got maybe 2,000 votes, something like that.
Who was the president? Was there a presidential candidate for that party?
Yes, there was, and right off the top of my head, I can't remember his name. I think it was like Carroll. That might have been the last time around. I'm not for sure.
What are the belief systems in that party? Or maybe it's too complex to just in the American Solidarity.
It's pro-life, and pro-social justice.
Was it started by a group of people that had common values, or?
Yes, I think its remote origins were like the Christian Democrat Party, and then that kind of went by the wayside, and then it was revived, I guess. I don't know the history of it actually, but as the American Solidarity Party. And the idea being solidarity, uniting the country and according to these values that a Catholic can say yes to on both things.
So another issue that I know you feel strongly about, you brought it up earlier, was the issue of immigration, and so I'm wanting to know a little bit more about your values in terms of the immigration issue and your views that those values inform. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I've much of my ministry has been in Spanish language parishes all along. People have an obligation to protect their children and to provide for their children. And if they cannot do that in their place of origin, they've got a God-given right. They've got an obligation to find some other place where they can provide for their children and protect them. And if they can't do it in their country of origin, like a country that's all in civil war or got narco-traficantes or whatever, they've got a God-given right to go to another country where they can provide for their children and protect them. And so while we have the receiving country has a right to protect its borders, to manage the flow of the demographic flow in a way that serves the common good, does not have the right to prevent people from exercising their human rights. And the scriptures are continually a story of migration. Abraham migrates to the Holy Land. Joseph brings his family down to Egypt. Then the Babylonian captivity coming back, and then the Holy Family, and they're fleeing to save their son's life, flee to Egypt, the flight into Egypt. So the idea of migration is hard baked into Catholic theology. And in Christian theology, that's the mystery of the whole thing. And so right now, and a side point is, there's no point in history other than like the Iron Curtain where a national border has prevented the flow of a population when there are strong economic reasons for that demographic shift, where there's a lot of workforce available and a lot of jobs available on the other side of the border. And so that's just in history, that's happened all along. So our choice is not whether people will immigrate or not, but whether we'll try to make it as miserable for them as possible, because they're coming and they will be here. And so we need to, instead of talking about amnesty or anything like that, which implies a crime, we need to think in terms of welcome. And these people are ours. God gave the world to all of us, and we Americans are, almost all of us, most of us anyway, are the descendants of immigrants, and so we have less right than anyone else to deny that same opportunity to someone that comes these days.
Did you grow up with that perspective on immigration?
We never really talked about it that much, but my grandparents were, came from Europe. I think I mentioned earlier when we were talking about my grandfather lost 20 of his cousins in the Holocaust. So part of the story was that the border was closed. They couldn't get out of Poland in time because the border was closed, and so they died. And it was a racially motivated thing. It's no secret that our immigration laws mainly impact people of color, and so no one's going to talk about it that way, but there's a subtext there that you can kind of notice.
You clearly, if you've been working in primarily Hispanic congregations as a priest, have grown to love the Hispanic community. Was your first parish in a Hispanic area?
No, it was in south side of Oklahoma City, But within a month, I was doing Spanish masses in Hinton and Clinton, Oklahoma, and there was a 10-year period when I was a pastor, founding pastor of St. Monica Parish in Edmond, Oklahoma, which is a thoroughly English-speaking parish. But other than here in the Diocese of Little Rock, 1/3 of the people at worship on any given at Catholic worship any weekend are in a Spanish language service. That's in 43 of our parishes, and so it's a big part of the life of the church in Arkansas, of the Catholic Church in Arkansas.
How is the Catholic Church supporting the immigrant population right now in our current presidential climate?
Well, I just this last weekend or weekend before last, I had a message to the whole diocese regarding this topic. In fact, it was Democrat Gazette picked up on it, and that. So there's that. Many of our parishes have produced little cards to tell people what their rights are, and what to do if someone approaches them without a warrant, and what to do if they've got a warrant, so that they would know their rights. Because we're talking people being detained without a warrant, and they've never committed any crime or anything like that. The whole issue of due process is very much by the wayside for this group of populations.
Those of us sitting here in this podcast might agree with you, but there are going to be some of our listeners that probably do not, and some people even in your congregations in Arkansas that don't agree. So as we are coming across people in our own families and our own congregations who might view immigration differently and maybe even be openly hostile towards folks who are coming over or coming wherever they're coming from, do you have suggestions for how we can still have this good faith effort to have conversations with folks who differ from us on this issue?
Well, there's a limit, because when it's me that's been affected, taking the calm approach is indicated, I guess you could say. But when somebody else's rights are being violated, I've got an obligation to speak up in their defense. Also, we actively try now within the Catholic Church. I was going to say, we're not a democracy, and so they can't get rid of me. In most circumstances, even if they disagree with me. So a Catholic priest has got more freedom than one whose job depends on keeping the approval of their congregation. And so there's in a way they have to be more heroic than we do, because they can always say, well, this is from the bishop, and but I don't get that much pushback. It may be that I've spoken on this topic over the last 16 years, so people have already kind of realized the position that the Catholic Church takes on these matters. But so far, I've gotten 2 letters that people that disagreed with me, and maybe one faithful. I post everything on Facebook. One or 2 persons who, maybe more than that, I don't remember now, who disagreed with me, and but mostly it's strong support. We've got so many of our families that are mixed families also. They've got a English, Anglo, one spouse, and the other one is Hispanic. And so it's not just the people that have immigrated, but also their families that have been established here now.
Well, that's it for the first part of our conversation with Bishop Anthony Taylor. But we covered a lot of ground in this talk, so we'll get to the second part of our conversation with Anthony in the next episode, so be sure to join us for that one as well.
You can find us on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website at arkansas.braverangels.org or on many podcast sites.
When you visit our website, in addition to contact information for us, you'll also find links to all our episodes featuring past guests you'll find of interest. One previous interview we suggest you check out is our conversation with J. McDaniel, Professor of Religion. You can find that conversation in episodes 71 and 72.
Special thanks to the Central Arkansas Library System for use of their recording facilities for these episodes with Bishop Taylor.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, April Chatham Carpenter,
And Glen White.
let's each do our part to bring our community closer together.